Permian Basin.
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 Eastern New Mexico, early 2022. A tanker truck rolls slow down a caliche road in the dark, no lights, dust lifting behind it in the dry wind. The driver knows where he's going. He's been here before. The wellhead is right where it always is, iron and shadow against a flat, black sky. In 40 minutes, the truck is full. In 40 minutes, the crude oil inside it belongs to someone it was never supposed to belong to. In the next 2 years, this will happen again and again and again. 14 people, spread across 2 states, will move stolen crude oil through one of the most surveilled energy corridors in America, and they will make money doing it. Not by hacking a system, not by bribing a senator, by understanding exactly how the oil industry measures what it has, and exploiting the one moment when nobody is watching. The Permian Basin produces nearly half of all American oil. The companies that operate here are worth billions. The federal government leases the land. Multiple agencies watch it. The question is not how they got caught. The question is how 4 years passed before they did. To understand how this works, you need to understand where it happens. The Permian Basin is not a city. It's not a county. It's not even a single state. It's a slab of earth, 86,000 square miles of it, spread across southeastern New Mexico and West Texas, roughly the size of the entire state of Kansas. Underneath it sits one of the largest deposits of crude oil ever found in human history. America drills here the way a doctor draws blood, constantly, deliberately, with practiced efficiency. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the Permian Basin produced nearly half of all U.S. crude oil in 2024, averaging 6.3 million barrels per day. No other region in the country comes close. In the small towns that dot this basin, Lovington, Seminole, Electra, the oil industry is not an abstraction. It's the job. It's the truck parked outside. It's the alarm that goes off at 4 in the morning. Men and women in this part of the country have worked the fields for generations. They know the equipment. They know the roads. They know exactly how crude oil moves from the ground to the refinery. And they know every step in between. Lovington, New Mexico sits about 20 miles west of the Texas state line. Population roughly 11,000. It is the kind of place where everyone knows what kind of truck everyone else drives. Electra, Texas, where the Reed family is from, is smaller. 25 miles northwest of Wichita Falls, a town built by oil, sustained by oil, and largely ignored by everyone who doesn't work in oil. James Darrell Reed is 65 years old. His son, Randall Wayne Reed, is 41. Together they run a Texas-based company called Reedco Enterprises, a crude oil purchasing and handling operation. They know the business. They understand custody, transport, and the paperwork that follows a load of crude from the moment it leaves a wellhead to the moment it gets sold. That knowledge, prosecutors now allege, is exactly what made them useful. Crude oil in the Permian is priced against a benchmark called West Texas Intermediate, WTI. On any given day, a barrel of WTI trades at a specific price. Everyone in the industry knows that number. It's the baseline. It's the reference point. It's the number that tells you what a barrel is worth and what you should pay for one. Here's the thing about WTI pricing. When someone sells crude significantly below it, buyers know something is wrong. The oil is distressed. There's a problem with the lease. There's a paperwork issue. Or, and this is the version that ends in federal court, the oil isn't theirs to sell. The Reeds were not the only ones in this. 11 more defendants are from Lovington. Some of them, prosecutors allege, are the ones who actually went out to the wellheads. Some of them drove the trucks. Some of them sold. And somewhere in the middle of this network, across 2 states, across dozens of transactions, someone was leasing land from the United States government and using it as a staging area for stolen crude oil. That detail matters. It's not just theft. When you steal from a producer operating on federal land, you're stealing from the American taxpayer. And that brings in an agency that doesn't give up easily. Every industry has a version of the same problem. You can't watch everything at once. In oil country, the moment that matters is custody transfer. That's the industry term for what happens when crude oil changes hands, when it leaves the wellhead or the tank battery and gets loaded onto a truck. At that moment, someone has to measure it. Someone has to document it. Someone has to sign off on how many barrels left, where they're going, and who owns them now. That document is called a run ticket, or, in modern operations, a load ticket. It's a record of the transfer. It's the paper trail. It's the thing that, in theory, makes crude oil traceable from the ground to the refinery. The problem is measurement. In the Permian Basin, crude oil is produced across thousands of individual wells, spread across tens of thousands of square miles. Some of these are big operations with full-time staff and sophisticated automated systems. Many are not. Many are unmanned tank batteries, steel storage tanks sitting at the end of a dirt road, miles from anyone. The producer gets readings. The trucking company picks up. The ticket gets generated. But the moment between the tank and the truck, that moment has gaps. What prosecutors allege is that the crew in Lovington understood those gaps. Several defendants are accused of going directly to producers in the eastern New Mexico region of the Permian, pulling crude that didn't belong to them, or pulling more than they were authorized to take, and moving it before anyone could reconcile the numbers. The oil then went somewhere most people wouldn't think to look, onto land leased from the federal government. One of the conspirators, according to the indictment, held a lease on that land. The stolen crude got stored there, quietly, out of the normal chain of custody, off the paperwork that producers were tracking, and then it got sold, below WTI pricing, significantly below according to prosecutors. That below market price was not a loss, it was a feature. It was the price that made buyers not ask too many questions. It was the discount that moved stolen crude through the market fast, before anyone started looking for it. The buyers in Texas, Reedco Enterprises and others, allegedly knew the oil was stolen. The charges say so explicitly. They knew, and they transported it across the New Mexico state line anyway, because that border crossing is where a state crime becomes a federal one, and because for a while, nobody was watching closely enough to stop them. 4 years. That's how long this went on, according to Lee County Sheriff Corey Helton. 4 years of trucks rolling, oil moving, money changing hands. The question is what finally made someone look up. Here's the math, and the math matters. West Texas Intermediate, WTI, has traded in roughly the $70 to $85 per barrel range for much of the past 2 years. Call it $75 a barrel as a working number. A standard crude oil tanker truck carries approximately 130 to 200 barrels per load, depending on the truck and the configuration. Call it 150 barrels per run. At $75 a barrel, one truckload is worth roughly $11,250 in market crude. Now, the stolen crude gets sold significantly below WTI. Prosecutors confirm this, but the exact discount will emerge at trial. In documented oil theft cases, below-market crude often moves at 20 to 40% under spot price, say 30% under. That means the buyer pays around $52 a barrel. That's still $7,800 a load. And the seller paid nothing for the oil because they stole it. That's not a business, that's a machine. And if this operation ran for 4 years, and even pulled one load per week, that's 200 plus runs. Even at $7,000 profit per run, you're looking at over $1 million. If they ran it harder than that, if they moved 2 or 3 loads a week on active stretches, the numbers climb fast. The industry groups, the Permian Basin Petroleum Association and the Texas Independent Producers and Royalty Owners Association, said publicly after the indictments that the full dollar amount of the theft won't be known until the case progresses. That is not a small disclosure. That's an organization telling you, we don't know how bad it is yet. What we do know is what the oil was stored on, federal land. A conspirator held a U.S. government lease. That crude was sitting on American taxpayer property, waiting to be sold into the American energy market, while the producers it was taken from were reconciling numbers that didn't add up. Every barrel stolen reduces revenue not just for the producer. It reduces royalty payments to landowners. It reduces severance tax revenue to New Mexico and Texas. It reduces production data that the federal government uses to track energy supply. One stolen barrel is not just theft. It's a corruption of the entire measurement system that the oil market runs on. That is the scale. That is why 5 agencies eventually showed up. But first, someone had to run it, and for a while, they ran it clean. The operation, as prosecutors describe it, was a relay. It starts in eastern New Mexico. That's where the producers are. That's where the tank batteries sit at the end of dirt roads, on leases scattered across Lee County and Eddy County, 2 of the most productive oil counties in New Mexico. This is where the first part of the crew works. These are the people who know the fields. They know which tanks are active, which roads are monitored, and which locations run unmanned for stretches of time. Crude comes out of the ground. It collects in a tank battery. It's supposed to be measured, loaded under ticket by a licensed carrier, and dispatched to a buyer with full paperwork. What allegedly happened instead? Certain members of the crew loaded crude without authorization. They pulled oil that wasn't theirs, or they pulled more than was documented. Either way, the oil went into a truck without a legitimate run ticket for it. That truck didn't go straight to Texas. It went somewhere quieter first. One of the conspirators held a lease on federal land. The stolen crude got offloaded there, staged, waiting, out of the normal custody chain. From that staging point, the oil got sold to the next layer of the operation, co-conspirators who bought it significantly below WTI. Those buyers weren't in New Mexico. They were in Texas. Reedco Enterprises, run by the Reeds out of Electra, allegedly purchased the crude knowing it was stolen. That's not an inference. That's what the federal charges state. The buyers knew. The truck then crossed the New Mexico-Texas border. That crossing is the moment that makes this a federal crime. Interstate transportation of stolen property. One state line, and the case moves from a county sheriff's problem to a U.S. attorney's problem. In Texas, the oil got resold at a profit, because even though the buyers paid below WTI to acquire it, they could flip it closer to market rate to end buyers who had no idea the crude had ever been stolen. By the time it reached a refinery or a broker, it looked like legitimate product. It had been laundered through the transaction itself, priced below market going in, moved across a state line, and sold into a market that had no way to trace it back. 14 people, 2 states, at least one lease on federal land, a trucking operation, a crude oil purchasing company, and 4 years of runs. The machine worked until the numbers started talking. For 4 years, the producers in eastern New Mexico had a problem they couldn't name. In the oil business, measurement discrepancies happen. They happen because crude oil is a physical substance that behaves differently in different temperatures. They happen because tank gauges drift. They happen because drivers miscalculate or misreport. Some level of variance is normal. It's expected. It's built into the tolerance tables that producers use to reconcile what comes out of the ground against what gets paid for. What allegedly happened here was something that looked on the surface like measurement variance. Numbers were off. Tanks came up short, but not so short and not so consistently that it immediately screamed theft, at least not at first. Meanwhile, the operation kept running. The crew in Lovington had something going for them that most thieves don't. They understood the system from the inside. These were not outsiders who stumbled into oil country. They were people who knew how crude moves. They knew what the paperwork was supposed to say. They knew the rhythms of the field, when trucks were expected, when tanks were read, when anyone would even be close enough to notice. That knowledge is what kept them invisible. On the Texas side, Reedco Enterprises looked like what it was supposed to look like, a crude oil purchasing company that bought product and resold it. Below market price can have explanations. Distressed product, small producer needing fast cash, a lease issue that needs resolution. The buyer doesn't have to ask too many questions if the price is good enough to make the questions feel inconvenient. And across the state line in New Mexico, producers were writing off variance, adjusting their numbers, wondering quietly if their equipment needed calibration. The oil kept moving. The money kept moving. Nobody said the word stolen, not yet. But in a county sheriff's office in Lovington, something small was starting to look wrong. Lea County, New Mexico, population of the whole county, about 75,000 people. Sheriff Corey Helton runs the department. His office covers an enormous stretch of high desert, oil country, ranching country, the kind of terrain where a truck can be 10 miles from the nearest paved road and nobody would know it was there. At some point, something landed on Helton's radar. A complaint, a discrepancy, a producer who'd run out of patience trying to explain where their oil was going. The indictment doesn't detail the origin of the investigation in public-facing documents, but Helton has confirmed one thing. From the moment his office started looking at this to the day the indictments came down in April 2026, the investigation took 4 years. 4 years is a long time. It means they didn't rush in. It means they watched. It means they built a case layer by layer, until they had 14 names and enough evidence to take to a federal grand jury in Lubbock. The Bureau of Land Management got involved. That's the agency that manages the federal land where some of the stolen crude was allegedly staged. When BLM shows up, it means federal land was part of the scheme. And that means the federal government is a victim, not just a bystander. That changes the weight of the case. The FBI's Dallas field office came in, Texas DPS Criminal Investigation Division, Eddy County Sheriff's Office. 5 agencies, 4 years, across 2 states, watching the trucks roll. According to prosecutors, the operation didn't try to hide the state line crossing. They just did it. They drove the crude into Texas and sold it. Maybe they thought the geography protected them. But the moment that truck crossed the border, the case became federal. And federal cases don't have the same constraints on time, jurisdiction, or resources that a county sheriff's office does. By early 2026, the grand jury in Lubbock had heard enough. The indictment was returned April 8, 2026. 14 names, 2 states, 1 conspiracy charge each, with additional counts for several defendants. Arraignments were scheduled for late April. A follow-up hearing set for June in Lubbock. The trucks had finally stopped rolling, but the case was just beginning. April 22, 2026. United States Attorney for the Northern District of Texas, Ryan Raybould, makes the announcement. 14 defendants, indicted by a federal grand jury on conspiracy to transport stolen property in interstate commerce. Several defendants facing additional counts: interstate transportation of stolen property and receipt, possession, or sale of stolen property. The names stretch across 2 states. On the Texas side were Randall Wayne Reed and his father, James Darrell Reed, owners of Reedco Enterprises in Electra. On the New Mexico side were 11 more defendants from Lovington, ages ranging from 22 to 68, a father and son, oil field workers, truck drivers, people who knew the Permian Basin the way you know the neighborhood you grew up in. The penalties they face are not light. Conspiracy to transport stolen property in interstate commerce, maximum 5 years in prison. Each count of interstate transportation of stolen property, or receipt, possession, or sale of stolen property, maximum 10 years per count. Several defendants face multiple counts. The math on sentencing exposure if convicted on all counts gets steep fast. The total dollar amount of the theft? Still unknown. The Permian Basin Petroleum Association said it publicly. The full picture won't come into focus until the prosecution advances. That is its own kind of statement, that this case is large enough that the industry itself can't yet put a number on it. Assistant U.S. Attorney Ann Howie is prosecuting. The case is active. Arraignments happened late April. The next hearing is scheduled for June in Lubbock. All 14 defendants are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. The investigation, Sheriff Helton confirmed, took 4 years. 4 years of watching, 4 years of building. The case that resulted: 14 federal defendants, 5 agencies, 2 states, and an industry that is finally starting to admit the problem is larger than anyone wanted to say out loud. Here is what the industry association said after the indictments came down. They said oilfield theft has increased significantly in recent years. They said it threatens critical energy infrastructure. They said it reduces revenue for operators, royalty owners, and Texas taxpayers. They said it's a problem. What they didn't say, what nobody has said cleanly, is how it was possible for this to run for 4 years across 86,000 square miles of the most surveilled and economically significant energy-producing region in America and not get caught sooner. That question sits at the center of this story, and it doesn't have a comfortable answer. One interpretation is that the system worked, eventually. 5 agencies coordinated across state lines, built a patient case, and brought 14 indictments. Nobody walked, nobody vanished. The law caught up. Another interpretation is that the system failed for 4 years first, that producers were losing oil and writing it off as variance, that the gap between what comes out of the ground and what gets paid for was wide enough to hide a criminal operation inside it, that the measurement system, the load tickets, the run tickets, the custody transfer records that the entire oil market depends on has blind spots large enough to drive a tanker truck through, literally. And there's a third interpretation, one that the industry groups are quietly pointing toward. This wasn't an isolated ring. Texas passed new legislation during its 89th legislative session, creating the Organized Oilfield Theft Prevention Unit inside the Department of Public Safety through House Bill 48, signed into law by Governor Greg Abbott. Senate Bill 494, also signed into law, established the Stop Theft Task Force at the Railroad Commission of Texas. These are not the responses to one isolated incident. These are the responses to a pattern. The Railroad Commission's own Stop Theft Task Force has reported that roughly 40% of oil and gas operators in Texas have experienced theft in the prior year. A widespread, ongoing pattern of theft at scale, from the fields, from the tanks, that the industry is only now beginning to fully reckon with. 14 people are charged. Some of them may take plea deals. Some may go to trial. Some may cooperate. The full picture, the total barrels, the total dollars, the full network, will emerge slowly in courtrooms in Lubbock over months or possibly years. But here is the question that stays with you after the press releases are filed and the arraignments are over. If a group of oil field workers, not hackers, not nation-state actors, not a cartel with a logistics network, if regular people with trucks and industry knowledge could pull crude oil out of the largest energy-producing region in America and sell it for 4 years before anyone moved in, what does that say about who's really watching?